Welcome back, and as we were saying, we are commemorating the 70th anniversary of the July 25th glorious revolution, and we decided to talk more about the effect of that revolution over people, its policies, and its economies and industries. And we're very delighted to be having with us here over the phone live Dr. Youmn Hamaki, Professor of Political Science. Good morning, Dr. Youmn.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Oh, fine. Thank you.
How was the Egyptian economy like before the revolution, and what were its main sectors before the revolution?
Yes, actually, the revolution has affected to large extent the economy with very important pillars that we have to strengthen on. The first is, limiting the ownership of land. And this is, by reducing the ownership of land into 100 firdans only. And this, it aims actually to redistribute the wealth and the ownership of land. The second pillar, was for industrialization. The revolution introduced the concept of industrialization of Egypt, and we shouldn't mention that there was no industry before the revolution, but the industry before the revolution suffered from the importation, and before the revolution there were trials actually to enhance industrialization, but the main obstacle was in this part, we have to remind the great efforts done by Talat Harb and establishment of Masr Bank, and starting very strategic industries like ready-made garments and studio of cinema, and all these activities they started, but the main obstacle was the protection and the free trade that affected, the growth of such industries. So the revolution started by enhancing industrialization with a slogan of producing or manufacturing from needle to rockets. But unfortunately, the revolution or the management, the economic management of this industrial sector neglected exportation. So they started to concentrate on producing chemicals, heavy industries, and the problem of these industries were the reliance on importation, because we have to import raw materials, we have to import capital goods, and we have to import intermediate goods. So there was very big, heavy importation side, because we have to import mostly everything in order to manufacture such industries, since Egypt didn't have a comparative advantage in these heavy industries. Besides, there were very important industries that Egypt had a comparative advantage, like ready-made garments, but we have done quite well in Al Mahalla Al Kubra, but unfortunately we neglected exportation, so that the balance of trade of such industrialization actually was quite negative, because we have to import a lot without having the comparative advantage to produce for exportation. But with this heavy industrialization, there were nationalization, which means the transfer from the private sector into public sector, and it started by most of the industries that were existing and then continued into the service sector, the banking sector, and so on. So with this public ownership and heavy industrialization, we started a very big start in the first 5-year plan, which was 60 to 61. And the first year of this plan proved to have a very good result regarding GDP growth and the share of industry in generating GDP and so on. So Egypt started quite good into industrialization and into building, the main industries that were quite important. And if we compare such experience with the experience of South Korea, for example, we have the same start, which means that South Korea started with heavy industries, started with a large, share and contribution of the public sector or the share of government. We have the same, structure of starting up industrialization, but, the difference quite was that South Korea turned into export promotion, and Egypt didn't go in this path, concentrated only on import substitution and such heavy industries in which we don't have a comparative advantage. These are the lessons learned from our experience. It was a very strong experience, and we have to learn from these lessons.
Right. Tell us more about the most critical decisions or the most critical changes taken by this revolution. You kindly mentioned the most important points economically, but let us talk about the drastic change in the sectors of society that was affected.
Yes, the drastic change, as I mentioned, turning from the private sector into the public sector, or the role of government, intensifying the role of government, which actually resulted in reducing significantly the role of the private sector in Egypt. This was quite a very important part. Another one is about the redistribution of income. The social dimension of this revolution was quite important by allowing education, health services for the majority of population, by having turning into more socialism, which means that the majority of people has the right to be educated and to have the health services and to benefit and to the ownership of land, as I mentioned. And from here, turning into such ideas allowed a large percentage of people to be educated, since we have, free education. And free education extended to all stages of education, including high education, which means that universities are open for all, categories of society to join, high education. And from here, the burden of, spending on education had increased substantially. Another drastic change that happened and affected seriously the performance of the economy, the decision that all graduates from university should have an opportunity of job by the government, which means that nowadays you change the labor market into a managed labor market managed by the government, and every graduate, and when you have free education, and every graduate should have an opportunity of job, it means that, you are turned into this guy's unemployment, because we have to find opportunities of job in everywhere. And, what you can do as a government to find such opportunities is to start with the government sector and the public sector, and from here it comes with free education. The number of graduates had increased substantially, and you have to find opportunities of job for them. So you started by putting them in the government, and from here it comes that this resulted in the problem we are still suffering from now, which is the large body of government. And besides, disguised unemployment because you don't have a job description for each one. You don't have actually, sometimes in the 60s and 70s, and you know, you don't have even places for such employee to start their job. And this was a quite dilemma for the economy, despite that it guaranteed an opportunity of job for all the graduates, despite this social dimension, but economically, it had actually a serious, you know, ramification for the performance of economy that still now we are trying to you know, restructure the government sector and try to improve the efficiency of private sector, since nowadays in Egypt you are turning into the dominance of the private sector on economic activities.
Right. As we all know that the revolution is very remarkable, and as we remember it, we can also should also remember the huge impact over industry in Egypt. See, many factories were established for history after
Yes,
this revolution.
of course.
Talk to us about this important phase and the number of factors and the industry in Egypt in many fronts and in many fields were affected, and how did that affect the course of events in Egypt?
Yes, we started very important industries like iron and steel, you know, chemical industries. And if we revise the structure of the public sector in Egypt, we can find that Egypt actually made the foundation for a very, you know, constructive industrial sector to lead the economy, to be the engine of growth. Since you started in medicines, you started even, we have till now a complex in order to produce the raw materials necessary for producing medicines, and you know, this you know, large factories for iron and steel, you know, expanding ready-made clothes and garments in Al Mahalla Al Kubra. You know, in everywhere you can find large industries, and these industries help to find opportunities of job for employees. But as I mentioned, our problem is that we should at this time, you know, specify which strategy we are following, like moving gradually, like what happened in South Korea and in China. All successful experiences actually succeeded in the transformation from import substitution as a very important startup into export promotion to reduce the burden on the balance of trade. Unfortunately, Egypt, despite the successful, you know, first 5-year plan, as I mentioned, regarding the indicators, unfortunately, we have to, you know, Egypt witnessed severe challenges like the war of 67 and then moving into the war of 73. And this burden actually affected seriously the economy, since we have to refer to a war economy in which we directed all our resources into the war economy.
Right. Also talking about the cultural changes that have affected, that was affected after this great revolution, cultural over the citizens and culture over the education, the changes in the education.
These are quite important transformation in the cultural life. These people, they feel that they are equal, they feel that they have more opportunities. This is the most important thing, is enlarging choices for people. This is the most, you know, positive impact of the revolution. Enlarging choices for education, enlarging sources for, you know, inequality of income distribution, of dreaming about a better, you know, future, not only related to to start being wealthy so that you can find an opportunity of job and opportunity in life to start, or to hope about a better life. So this is the most important thing that happened for the revolution. Better inequality of income distribution, more choices, more opportunities for people to enlarge their sources and so that to have a better quality of life.
Right. We should also talk about the most important, not the cultural, but at the same time, this change in thinking and in the attitudes of people, how they regarded the different ranks in society. There was a gap between a highest rank in society and the lower brackets. This totally was eradicated after the revolution.
Yes, this is what I have just
Was
mentioned.
that positive?
Yes, of course. This was positive, but we cannot say it was positive and just not taking into consideration the other repercussions that happen, because if you don't have with such positive cultural and social impact, you don't have a system in order to specify roles and responsibilities and to strengthen what we can call, the ethic of work, the ethic of taking a responsibility. Because, as I mentioned, when you put employee in the government sector without specifying roles and responsibilities, if you find this kind of these guys unemployment, this actually had other negative impact on the Egyptian worker, to how extent they have to take responsibilities, how to be actually better skillful in order to finish properly the work, how to be punctual in their going to job and returning, all this, we didn't take care of, strengthening on such ethics of work. And actually this was a defect that, affected to a large extent the positive impact of, better equality and redistribution of wealth and income.
Right. Also, another important impact of the revolution was the foreign policy of Egypt that have changed dramatically. Egypt's relation and partnership with African countries under the leadership of late President Gamal Abdel Nasser and the non-aligned movement that followed later on, and how Egypt took a leading role when it came to its position in the Middle East, and all those memories are unforgettable. Egypt attained a very impressive leading role after this revolution.
Yes, I agree with you that the role of Egypt in leading African continent as well as Arab countries was quite significant, which means that our relations with the African countries were quite good. Taking into consideration, supporting revolutions in these countries and supporting them in most of their projects for development, helping them in industrialization. We used to have, enough for export and import in order to enlarge trade between Egypt and the continent. as well as with Arab countries. But unfortunately, our relation with other countries of the world, like the Western
Right. Our
countries,
final question
United
to you.
States.
Yes, please.
Yes,
If you
this
like to.
part, we had a good relation with Africa, Arab countries, China, part of Asia, Russia. Russia, intensive relationship because we used to have all our technology and, what types of arming and, military industries. We moved toward Russia to a large extent. These are from regarding the direction of our international relations, but with the Western countries, on top of them, United States and Europe, our relations actually weren't quite good.
Right. Our final question to you, Dr. Youmn. Of course, ages are different and time is makes a great difference, and that phase is totally different from the current one. But there are good lessons that we should learn from that revolution. What are they?
Yes, the good lessons, as I mentioned, number one, when you move towards industrialization, you have to look to the economic side, which means that to what extent you have a comparative advantage in the industries you are entering. Like in Egypt nowadays, we are in a turning point towards industrialization. We had very strong industrial sector, but we need to differentiate and we need to concentrate on the industries that we have a comparative advantage and to strengthen the competitiveness of such industries so that to enable more exportation because we have, a severe deficit in our balance of trade. So this may help actually to find more opportunities for jobs to enhance the position of our labor work to upgrade their skills so that to cope with the requirement of international markets. So all these are quite important lessons that are important. Nowadays, actually, Egypt is having very good relations with all parts of the world. We benefited from the previous lessons from the revolution that we have to make, balanced relationships with all parts of the world. And these relations should be based on mutual benefits. And nowadays, Egypt is doing quite well. And President Sisi has just returned from a very important visit to Europe. And I believe we are doing quite well in it.
Right. Dr. Youmn Hamaki, would like to thank you so much. You are a professor of political science, and you have a good day. And we're going to take a short break and we'll come to continue the breakfast show. So stay with us.